Okay, in this video we're going to find x and y intercepts given a polynomial function. Okay, so some reminders. To find the y-intercept, you let x equal 0. Okay, and remember your answer is always going to be the constant at the end. If there is a constant, it's going to be that answer. Okay, it's going to be the term that doesn't have an x in it. In other words, so if all the x's go to 0, then whatever's left is going to be your answer to your y-intercept. And to find the x-intercept, you let f of x equals 0 or y equals 0, they're interchangeable, and solve. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one. We have f of x is equal to 2x squared minus 15x plus 18. Okay, so to find the x-intercepts, I'm going to set f of x equal to 0 and solve. So 0 is equal to 2x squared minus 15x plus 18. Okay, and I'm going to solve this thing. I'm going to multiply the 2 times the 18, which is 36. Okay, I want to find two numbers that multiply to get 36, but add to get negative 15. And that's going to be negative 12 and negative 3. Okay, so negative 12, negative 3. Okay, so if you add those together, you get the middle number. If you multiply them, you get positive 36. Okay, so here's how I factor. Now, some people factor differently than this, but this is how I do it. So I'm going to put 2x in front of both of my parentheses. Okay, and then I'll put my factors here, minus 12 and minus 3. Now, this isn't right because 2x times 2x is not 2x squared. But notice that both of these, the 2x and the minus 12, can be divided by 2. So if you divide by 2, now it's correct. Okay, so that would give you 0 is equal to x minus 6 and 2x minus 3. Okay, if we solve each one of those, we get x minus 6 equals 0, which gives us x equals 6. And we get 2x minus 3 equals 0. 2x is equal to 3. X is equal to 3 halves. Okay, so those are your two x-intercepts, 6 and 3 halves. Okay, so x-intercepts are 6 and 3 halves. All right, now for the y-intercept, you make x equal to 0. Okay, so if we make x equal to 0, that would mean we're plugging in a 0 here. So f of 0 is equal to 2 times 0 squared minus 15 times 0 plus 18. Okay, so this term goes away because it's got a 0 in it. This term goes away because it's got a 0 in it. The only number that's left is the 18. So our y-intercept is y equals 18. Now you may be asked to write these as x equals these numbers, like x equals 6 and 3 halves, or not, just however you're asked to type it in or to write it down on your homework. Okay, and this may be, you may need to type in y equals 18. Okay, let's take a look at this one over here. All right, so if we factor this out, okay, we factor, first of all, let's take out a negative x. The reason I'm taking out a negative is because our leading term is negative, so I'd like to get that to be positive, and they all have an x to give. Okay, so let's factor out a negative x, and that will give me x squared for the first term. This one, if I divide out a negative x, I get negative x out. And if this one I divide by negative x, I get negative 12. Okay. All right. So for your, let's do y-intercept first this time. If I do y-intercept, basically everywhere I see an x, I put a 0. Okay. So that's going to be, for the y-intercept, we would get equals negative 0 times 0 squared minus 0 minus 12. But notice that the negative, or the negative doesn't matter, but the 0 is getting multiplied by this whole thing, right? So 0 times anything is 0, so this becomes 0. So our y-intercept is just 0. Okay, now for our x-intercepts, we need to continue factoring this. Okay, so we need to factor the x squared minus x minus 12. So we need two numbers that multiply to get negative 12, but add to get negative 1. There's a negative 1 here that's unwritten. Okay, so that's going to be negative 4 and positive 3. So f of x is equal to, let's see, negative x, and then x minus 4x plus 3. That's how that factors. Okay, so if you set that equal to 0 to find your y-intercept, so set f of x equals 0. You would solve all three of these, so you get negative x equals 0, x minus 4 equals 0, and x plus 3 equals 0. So this gives you, if you divide by negative 1, x equals 0. This gives you x equals 4, and this gives you x equals negative 3. Okay, let's do these last two. Okay, so on this one, to find the y-intercept, we could just put a 0 everywhere we see an x, right? And since every term has an x, the whole thing's going to go to 0 if we put a 0 in for x. So our y-intercept is going to be y equals 0. Okay, once we sub in x equals 0, all the terms go away and turn into 0. Okay, so let's find the x-intercepts. So 0 is equal to negative 3x cubed minus 21x squared minus 30x. The first thing I'm going to do is factor out, well, a negative, because we're leading with a negative, right? And the biggest number that I can take out of all three of these is a 3, so a negative 3 will come out. And they can all give an x as well. So I'm going to factor out a negative 3x out of this trinomial here. Okay, so when I factor it out, my first term becomes x squared. Let's see, negative 21 divided by negative 3 is 7, and it lost an x because we're dividing it out, so 7x. And then negative 30 divided by negative 3 is 10, and it lost its x. So there's what I get on the inside, my quadratic. And now I'll factor this. Two numbers that multiply to get 10 but add to get 7, that's 5 and 2. So 0 is equal to negative 3x, x plus 5, x plus 2. So negative 3x equals 0, x plus 5 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. So x equals 0, x equals negative 5, and x equals negative 2. Okay, let's do this last one here. Okay, so on this one we have 4 terms. Okay, so this one is going to need to be factored by grouping. Okay, but before we do that, we can't answer the y-intercept. If we plug in a 0 in for x, this term goes to 0, this term goes to 0, this term goes to 0. This is what's left. Okay, so our y-intercept is y is equal to 40. Okay, now for the other problem, I'm going to factor this by grouping. I'm going to need a little more room here, so let me write the problem down. Okay, so if I factor this by grouping, what I'm doing is I am grouping the first 2 terms together, and I'm grouping the second 2 terms together. Okay, so if you look at the first 2 terms, what's the biggest thing that you can factor out of both of these terms? Definitely a 2. 2 goes into both of those. And this one has an x cubed, this one has an x squared, so I should be able to take an x squared out of both. So I'll take a 2x squared out of both of those. What is left? Okay, so if I factor out a 2x squared, the 2's gone and 2 of the x's are gone, so that just leaves an x there. So I'm dividing this by this. And if I divide negative 10x squared by 2x squared, the x squareds go away. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Okay. And now we do the same thing here. What's the biggest thing I can take out of both of these? And since I'm leading with a negative, I'm going to factor out a negative something. It looks like 8 goes into itself, and 8 also goes into 45 times. So I'm going to factor out a negative 8. And that will leave me with x when I divide this. And then 40 divided by negative 8 is negative 5. Okay, now notice the parentheses are the same. That's good. Okay, so we will take out an x minus 5 out of both of these and bring it out to the front. Okay, so if I factor out an x minus 5, that's gone because it's factored out. What does it leave? Well, it leaves 2x squared minus 8. Okay, so we're factored, sort of. We're partly factored. Okay, remember we're setting this equal to 0 eventually. First of all, I need to take a number out of here. What's the biggest number I can take out of here? It looks like a 2. So I'll factor a 2 out to the front. So I get x minus 5 and then an x squared minus 4 equals 0. Now this, I hope you recognize, is a difference of squares. You remember difference of squares, a squared minus b squared, is equal to a plus b, a minus b. Okay, so x squared minus 2 squared, x and 2. Okay, so this gives me this x plus 2, x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, and now that I have it completely factored, now I can set all 3 of these equal to 0. So x minus 5 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, and x minus 2 equals 0. So that gives me x equals 5, x equals negative 2, and x equals positive 2. Okay, so going back to the problem, my x-intercepts are x equals 5, negative 2, and 2. Okay, I'm going to do a couple more examples on factoring by grouping and finding x and y intercepts. Okay, so on this, first of all, your y-intercept, if you've got your y-intercept, you set x equals 0. Okay, so all these terms go away except for this one that doesn't have an x in it. So it's y equals 9 is your y-intercept. Okay, your x-intercept, you set 0, f of x equals 0. Okay, and we're going to try to factor this by grouping again. Okay, we've got a cubic, so this is how we try it. This is the only way to factor when you've got a cubic function. Okay, we factor by grouping. Okay, so we look at the first two. What can I divide out of both x cubed and x squared? Well, I can divide out an x squared, and that leaves x minus 1 when I factor this out of both those terms. And then what can I take out of these two terms? And since this is leading with a negative, I want to factor out a negative. So I'm going to factor out a negative 9, which gives me x minus 1 as well. Okay. And now since they both have an x minus 1 to give, I'm going to factor that out. X minus 1, and that leaves x squared minus 9 when I factor out the x minus 1. Okay. This, again, is a difference of squares, so 0 is equal to x minus 1, and this is 3 squared, so it's x plus 3, x minus 3. Okay, so that gives us solutions. Well, let's write it out real quick. So x equals 1, x equals negative 3, and x equals positive 3. So your x-intercepts, these are your x-intercepts. Okay, one more of these. We're going to find the x and y intercepts of this. Okay, so the y-intercept again is pretty easy. We set x equals to 0. The only term that doesn't go to 0 is this one. So it's y equals 32 is your x-intercept. Okay, now to find the or this y-intercept, excuse me. To find the x-intercept, you set f of x equal to 0. We'll do that. Okay, it looks like they all have a 2 to give. Okay, so I can factor out a 2 out of everything. So 0 is equal to 2 times x cubed minus x squared minus 16x plus 16. Okay, and now I can factor this by grouping. Okay, so it looks like the biggest thing I can take out of here is x squared, since they both have that to give. So we get 2 here out front. And you know what? I can just divide that 2. I can divide both sides by 2 here. Okay, because it doesn't really matter. And 0 divided by 2 is still 0. So let's get rid of that 2 so it won't clutter up our work. So 0 is equal to this stuff. We'll just pay attention to that. We're factoring out an x squared, which leaves x minus 1. And on this, we'll factor out a negative 16. Negative, because this leading one here is negative, which leaves x minus 1. If we factor out an x minus 1 out of both of those terms, we get x squared minus 16. Okay. Now this will factor using a difference of squares. This is 4 squared, so this is going to factor into x plus 4, x minus 4. So we get x minus 1, x plus 4, x minus 4, which gives us solutions of x equals 1, negative 4, and positive 4. And those are my x-intercepts.